What's up, data transformers? This is Bolaji, and welcome to Data Career Transformations, the show where we watch analytics engineers, data analysts, and data scientists transform their career. Today, we're talking to a data engineering leader with expertise in DBT development, workflow orchestration, developing ML platform pipelines in Python at scale. I mean, this dude is like a certified AWS solutions architect, a Google Cloud data engineer professional, focusing on architecting streaming data solutions. But here's what you don't know about him. He actually played baseball semi-pro in high school and at the collegiate level as well. There was a cost to this. There's a cost to being the boss, right? And we're going to get to that in a minute. He's a self-professed reality TV nerd. Hello, my kind of people. He can't help himself, right? Vanderpump Rules, Summer House, they keep him crawling back, baby. And he has a passion for the mental health field. His wife is actually wrapping up her PhD in clinical psychology this year. Let's go. So dinner at their house, if you ever go, you will get psychoanalyzed. Yep. Please help me welcome the director of engineering at BetterHelp. Yes, that BetterHelp. Johnathan Brooks, but we call him JB, baby. What up, JB?
Hey, Bolaji. Awesome intro, man. I'm super stoked to be here. Ton of stuff in there. But yeah, really appreciate that. That's great. I'm super pumped to jump in today. Ton of topics. Let's do this thing.
Well, this is wild. I mean, I'm very, very excited to have someone on the show with your background, played professional sports at such a high level. You've worked in the mental health field as a data engineer. There's so much that we'd love to get into. But before we do that, I need to get into this whole baseball. How are you playing semi-pro baseball as a junior in high school? Who does that?
No, yeah, good question. I'll clarify it. It was a junior in college. It was kind of between those 2 years. Yes. So yeah, I did play high school, then through to college ball. It was Division III. So, we were doing our best. It was super fun. We had an amazing time over at Occidental College out in LA. But I played up in Bend, Oregon for the Bend Elks, which is this really cool town, cool community.
Nice.
It was just an amazing experience up there. And I had an amazing time. Yeah, I was not the fastest baseball player, I'll admit. I'm still extremely slow, but I hit okay. So they let me play.
Yeah, you're faster than us because you did it and we did not. Congratulations on being able to play at that level. There are a lot of us that are still trying to live that unicorn fantasy. Like, I'm in my adult kickball league and, maybe it's not too late for me. I can still make it, JB.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Just, I get to stretch more these days, right? I went and tried to play adult league ball this last summer, pulled my hamstring the first game.
No.
Careful, everybody.
Stretch and hydrate, people. Stretch and hydrate. This whole pursuit of athletic excellence is really intriguing to me. And you shared a little bit about an article that was written about you when you were in high school called Perfection Has Its Privileges. I mean, you were an all-star academically, you were an all-star athletically. Who wouldn't want to have an article written about them in high school? Talk about perfection has its privileges. But you said it was a double-edged sword. It actually wasn't all aces. Tell me a little bit about what that experience was like.
Well, yes. Yeah. A good one to start with. I'll say first off, besides getting made fun of a ton by my friends for such
Of course.
A big one for me, and it kind of leads into later the kind of conversation around mental health. But this article, I think it was written, again, that junior year, and it was really cool that it existed. It's an interesting thing to, my parents were all stoked about it, but in practice, right, it was physical manifestation of the way I was thinking about, my sports, school, personal life, trying to balance all those things. And, even though, in theory, maybe from the outside, people are like, oh, he's doing a lot of cool stuff here. In practice, I would sleep 3 hours a night, 4 hours a night. I didn't have really good balance at all. I was trying to do a double major amidst the sports too. And, I think there was this really, this important moment or many moments where, I that overextending myself soon thereafter really slapped me in the face that have helped me learn how to, appropriately balance things today. But it was cool to exist, I suppose, but, very indicative of some things I had to self-reflect on and really improve on in myself.
Mm. Yeah, this hits home for me, JB. I mean, I grew up in Nigeria. We played sports a lot, but we didn't have the level of organized sports that are available here in the United States. And for those watching or listening who live outside of the US, you may not have this culture, but I'm raising kids in the US right now. I've got two teenage sons who play soccer, and I mean, it is intense. Right. Well, I got my first kid into soccer at age 7, just for something for him to do. Turns out he was pretty good at it, yada, yada, yada. Now it's like 5 to 6 nights a week. We are doing soccer stuff. We are traveling on weekends. We're paying for hotels. We're paying for flights. It's a whole family commitment. And along the way, I've even started to question as a parent, this kid is sacrificing something. Like, is it really worth it? We love the athletic excellence, and he's excellent academically as well. But how much do we actually pay to mental health? I'm curious as to when you yourself and maybe your parents started to really tune in to the mental health costs, potential costs of living such an intense teenage life.
Mhm. Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, totally. An important question I think so many folks ask for myself, and I think for my parents too. It started to kind of be somewhat considered in high school. I think at that time, I would be, falling asleep in classes, things like that. Sleep's always been a difficult one for me. But that at that time period, I think the openness around mental health hadn't quite evolved to the level that it has now. So although there was some of that, I do think really it was in college when I, kind of saw other folks around me that were open about their mental health journey, or were open about their struggles, that I started to
Right.
feel that I could be open about that weakness and think about the cost or the tax that, say, spreading yourself way too thin or setting unrealistic expectations can really have.
Mm.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is relevant, maybe particularly for people who work in our profession, whether you're a data professional or you're working in tech like I am. There's that risk of overextending oneself. There's that risk of succumbing to workaholism or just trying to actually keep up. Sometimes, depending on what industry you're in, the pressure at work could be to goodness. I'll put it this way. I was watching a video the other day about work culture in South Korea and how the current generation, a lot of young people are getting burned out. It's typical to work maybe 60 plus hours a week. It's affecting how families are developed. Like people are delaying marriage and having kids because so much has to go into the career. And I think the more people that are able to come forward and be vulnerable about mental health, the healthier, ironically, it makes the rest of us.
Absolutely. I think, yeah, and kind of as you mentioned, like in our line of work as well, technology moves quickly for those that work at organizations. Stakeholders, business expectations move quickly. We as data
Mhm.
practitioners are often expected to. I mean, the word agile, it's used all over. Yeah, we're expected to be very agile. And
Yes.
there's an underlying expectation, I think, to that you can context switch very effectively, that you maybe could drop on a dime in some cases to dive into something that's due right around the corner, all in
Hmm.
the while trying to build something that proactively lets you work more quickly for the business going forward. And
Yeah.
for many folks on my team, for myself, that balance can be tough. And I think, whether it's imposter syndrome or whether it's setting good boundaries, there are a ton of those things that I think need to be part of the way that we approach work on the day to day.
Very true. Very true. Okay. Thank you for sharing this, JB. We're glad you're here. I'm excited to learn more about the work that you're doing at BetterHelp. But before we go there, JB, I want to dig into your origin story a little bit. So, my understanding is that your first job out of school was in the insurance industry. Tell me about that.
Yeah. Yeah, it was this scrappy consulting company called Triage Consulting Group, and
Mhm.
it doesn't exist anymore. But some amazing folks. Shout out to those who work there. It's a huge network of folks. But it was a underpayment review process where we would figure out underpaid claims for hospital systems and whatnot, and basically kind of call insurance companies to basically get them paid correctly,
Mm.
escalate and try to research and help those hospitals kind of get the proper payment for those claims.
Mhm.
Yeah, it was a bit of a grind.
And is this where you kind of unlock that love for technology and healthcare?
Totally. As I'm doing my 50th call to Blue Shield of the week, on hold and escalating and getting headaches. I'm just seeing all these, and many others I worked with too, but we're seeing these kind of little inefficiencies, little capabilities within the company where maybe this little thing could be automated, or maybe this process over here, there's a data analytics or a data science solution that could help improve the way that we go about maybe identifying those underpayments, right? Yeah, it really was, a series of moments there that kind of brought my love of data out, which I can talk about.
Mm-hmm. That's really cool. That's really cool. Now, you actually got onto the DBT train early, though. How did you first get exposed to DBT? What problems was it solving for you?
After getting to move into a little bit of the SQL developer and then data engineering lightly side at that first organization, I did move into the consulting space around data soon after that, doing a lot of work in LookML, things of that nature, and ultimately just kind of having this moment of LookML is cool, semantic modeling here is great, but this feels like it should be in the warehouse. Some of this transformation, some of this logic, the testing that's not quite in here. I wish there was a tool for this. And a company called Fishtown Analytics, now DBT Labs, had this pretty cool tool coming out that I was really excited to be involved with early on.
Wow. Talking about way back since like 2017. JB he's an OG. He is an original for sure. Yeah, you actually spoke at the Coalesce conference back in 2020, I think it was.
That's right. Yeah, it was on using LookML, and DBT together. What goes where, maintaining good governance along the way. It was a fun time. Obviously, 2020, a little bit of a hectic period, but for DBT and its kind of development, it was really hitting a stride, and it's been cool to see the journey of DBT. I'll just say.
Yeah. And it seems you've continued to be on the bleeding edge, doing a lot of work with machine learning, LLMs. So, man, I can't wait to dig into that. But let's walk through your resume real quick, just so we can deconstruct how little JB from back in the day, actually became this incredible professional that we're seeing in front of us today. So, math and economics major in college, double major. I don't know what you were thinking. Math and economics major. Coming out of college, you did database administration, I think it was, some freelance development. And then you told us about Triage Consulting Group. Was that your first data engineer job title?
Yeah, once there, and kind of to complete that from earlier, it was after doing the calling insurance companies and that thing, connecting back to what we talked about, I kept that grinding kind of spirit, right? But I was trying to do it a little bit better. So rather than like grinding, staying up real late and kind of really trying to study things, I tried to do it a little bit smarter. Like, what is the industry moving? How can I understand, like, say, cloud architecture really well and system scale? And ultimately, like, really tried to push for this opportunity to do data engineering at Triage. And it just happened to work out. And there were some like little factors that led to that. But yes.
This is cool. I'm always interested, JB, in how folks are able to transition into that very first data role. How did it work for you?
Yeah, no, it's I agree. It is a kind of a fascinating leap, especially when it's a pivot like that. And for me, I think when I look back, I think 2 or 3 things really stand out that maybe unlocked that opportunity. One was, again, there's so much out there. And at the time, I think, like around 2015, there was a ton out there in terms of what you can study. Would you go to a coding boot camp? Do kind of just try to learn online? Do you, so many lenses, right? So many ways.
Yes.
And for me, I will say, and I still kind of feel this way. I don't know if this is a controversial opinion, but starting with learning some cloud architecture foundations, I think is helpful for a ton of different roles. Because if you're like, say, a data engineer or want to be an analytics engineer, right? Knowing how systems scale, knowing how AWS or Google Cloud or Azure kind of work behind the scenes, almost all tools, whether it's Snowflake or DBT running on Databricks or Snowflake or Redshift or what have you, behind all of that is AWS or Azure or GCP doing the cloud work, and I think it like helping that understand those foundations, it can help you a little bit get into the industry and speak the language. But I think it also can help propel you up into that next role because you understand how systems scale and you can kind of speak to other cross-functional roles about how to develop your kind of data ecosystem alongside DevOps or alongside data scientists.
That's interesting, JB, and I want to dig into that a little bit more because, frankly, being an outsider and just being introduced now into the data world, I'm trying to wrap my mind around why and how it is that the scale of the work, introduces a different dimension to things. When you're working with petabytes of data versus doing a smaller scale project, does that really change the nature and the structure of the work?
I think so, yes. Yeah, certainly, there are definitely different like coding patterns, design patterns that are going to be
Mm,
influential to how you develop. Certainly on the DBT side, right?
mm,
You're definitely going to be thinking incrementality first, or
mm,
the data warehouse, like clustering first in terms of how you build.
mhm,
But I think
mhm.
the big thing, and maybe why connecting it back to why maybe on the business side or management side, why it's kind of valued
Yeah.
is ideally if I'm coming into, when I joined BetterHelp, it was, fairly small. In an ideal world, I'm, the analytics engineers that I'm working with that are on my team have an eye for how you build for scale so that we don't have to rebuild later. We can kind of build with an eye for when we're big.
Wow.
And it really helps us like be quick, so when the company does accelerate in its data needs, we're ready for it.
Wow. 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 That's profound. I get it. I get it. As a business person, that makes complete sense. And I'd love for the data professionals in my organization to be thinking that way. So having said that, if we step back into your resume walk just for a little bit, you spent about 3 years at Triage as a data engineer. You then moved to 4 Mile Analytics as lead solutions architect. Okay, all right, now we're cooking. I mean, this is a good sounding title here, right? How did your work as solutions architect evolve from the data engineering work you were doing previously?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, first off, yeah, I was the third employee at that company, so it was kind of we had
Wow.
to be kind of scrappy. It's a small boutique consultancy, and
Mm-hmm.
the second thing I'll say is consulting's not for everybody. It does move very quickly, but I
Yeah.
learned a ton. Like it for those who are
Yeah.
considering it in data consultancy, you will learn a ton. They're just working with so many orgs and how they think about data, how their business
Mm,
folks think about solutions.
mm,
You learn a ton. But yeah, the main kind of evolution there, I think, was kind of going from like discrete problems that we were solving back at Triage to
yes.
kind of evolve their systems to again working with a lot of organizations and maybe applying, I think, as I mentioned earlier, some of that cloud knowledge that I really kind
Yes.
of focused in on, kind of taking, say, tools like at the time it would be like Looker and Snowflake and DBT, for example, and uniting that with some of those principles around how systems scale, things that I learned in those
Mm,
days. And just mainly it was more now in the domain of proposing how we solve problems. So how do we not just build them? And, I'd be involved in that too sometimes, but what's the initial architecture to make what they want to happen?
wow. Wow. I love that. I love that. I'm curious. I know you had a math and economics background. I'm not sure. Maybe that naturally plugs you into data engineering, the math piece in particular. How did you settle in on being data engineering focused versus an analytics engineer or a data analyst?
Yes. Good. Yeah. So funnily for me, when I was at Triage, I remember I told you I kind of settled on studying that cloud stuff, right?
That's right.
Well, before that, I tried studying software development and
Okay.
it was cool, but I realized, wow, there are so many frameworks and these
Hmm.
software developers are flying around on 20 things I've never heard of. This is too much. Yeah, respect to them. And then I tried data science for a little minute
Okay.
too. And I was like, wow,
Okay.
this is super fascinating. But I remember how I didn't get a lot of sleep in college. I did not remember the stats. I was like, okay, like this is, these data scientists are going to run circles around me. So ultimately, after multiple, I don't know if failure is the right word, but I'll call it failure.
Yeah.
I realized that data engineering was a middle ground where some of those software engineering principles and then
Mm,
some of these working with data science ideas kind of came
mm,
together and, that it worked for my way of thinking.
mm.
And I have a love for analytics engineering too. So those two are kind of my home base.
I gotcha. Okay, this is helpful for people who are maybe still earlier in their career and trying to figure out what lane suits them best. I find it useful to walk back and see people's thought process and how they navigated their careers. Having said that, I'm going to segue real quick. Interview questions. Do you recall any particularly difficult, maybe data engineering interview questions that you suffered through? And if so, could you share with us?
There definitely were a couple technical ones that felt like they were more software engineering focused, where people would get into algorithms and stuff, and that was tough. Yeah. I think for folks that come from a computer science background, that's a little easier, and there are ways to get to that point, but I struggled. I think when it comes to more kind of business type questions and more that side of things, though. One question that I remember stumbling on was we started with like some specific data questions and principles, which made a lot of sense. Right. But then they kind of said, well, how would this data question, or how would the implications of this result like impact the full business? And I realized, this was earlier on, but I realized, oh wow, I've been thinking about data engineering kind of just with what problems are in front of me, like solving data engineering problems, but I wasn't connecting it back to the business. So I kind of froze up. But it was I did not get that job, but it was a good moment of learning, like, oh, I really need to think about like everything I do, maybe like how does this connect back to the business or connect back to its mission or otherwise.
Wow. That's wild. Interesting. Okay. I appreciate that. So it wasn't necessarily the technical aspect of the question that stumped you, but the broader business context was not something that you had thought about at that point. To that point, JB, you transitioned from formal analytics, which a lot of people may not have heard of, to a company that most of us at this point have heard of. We've seen the ads on YouTube. I'm hearing the ads on podcasts at this point. Like, my favorite shows are talking about BetterHelp. How did you kick in the door and get into such a well-reputed brand, JB?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. BetterHelp. Yeah. It's been a great, time here. The way I got in, honestly, it's occasionally what happens in consulting. And I know it's, has its ups and downs, or has its, negatives to this potential route. But ultimately, BetterHelp was actually a customer of 4 Mile that I'd worked with for a long time. And, just getting to work with them, I'll say, I think the main thing that led me to consider working there was the people. I was thinking like, wow, this is what I would hope a mental health company's data team would look like, and how it would function.
Wow.
They were just talking about mental health in a very serious way, and it was awesome. And ultimately, I think with consulting, even though, as I mentioned, I learned a ton from it, it did have trouble with work-life balance near the end, and it made me want to consider looking at some other options that could give me a little bit more of what I was looking for.
The older I get, the more I start to realize and recognize that a lot of times things don't work out like they do in the movies. You don't necessarily solve the problem and then ride off into the sunset living happily ever after. Sometimes you learn the lesson and then you backslide, or it presents itself in a different form, and so on and so forth. Sometimes we might even have an ongoing struggle with the thing, and we need to set up systems in place to protect us from ourselves. So I appreciate the transparency here, JB, but you had the self-awareness to recognize when things were creeping in the wrong direction, and you made a pivot.
That's right. I think it's been, some of those early struggles I mentioned have been somewhat lifelong for me, as I know it is for many. It isn't, as you said very well, not a cohesive kind of story that leads to a nice outcome. It has its ups and downs. And I think I'll add here that, I kind of had a little bit of a health scare that also helped me realize like I need to perspectivize a bit more around where I put my time and how I'm, thinking about like this kind of time in my 20s, and, really grinding to get to those data kind of goals or maybe a job otherwise I was looking for, were in some ways helpful, but I need to be targeted. I need to be quality over quantity.
Man, JB. Okay, so we're about to talk about LLMs and artificial intelligence in a little bit. And this is so relevant, JB. This is so poignant because there's only, as humans, it's not a bug, it's a feature that we need rest. We need to rejuvenate and recharge ourselves. we need to have some semblance of balance. Even if we can't have balance every day, we need to at least have periods during which maybe we sprint and then we rest. We sprint and then we rest. With the advent of LLMs and artificial intelligence, it feels like there's all the more pressure on what makes us human, in that we feel like we have to be more and more productive to almost keep up with these algorithms and these robots. And it feels like a losing battle. Philosophically, I'm just interested in getting a snapshot of how you are thinking about this as a human working in technology, working in data. What's our place? How are we going to survive?
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's still evolving for me. It moves so quickly. Sometimes you see something in the news around the capability around an agentic AI tool or otherwise. It just blows your mind and makes you reconsider what's possible.
Yeah,
it's really true. But I think one top level thing for me is I definitely believe in the possibilities. I think that there are things to be watchful for. I think there's an understandable and very important check on where the applications are going, and the handling of data around that. Right. I think yeah, just speaking generally across like all organizations, certainly for any organizations that are considering it more that are more dealing with private data, healthcare or otherwise. But yeah, speaking more generally, I would say that, I think it does present a really cool opportunity short term. I think it's great to embrace it as a data practitioner, like productivity wise, using the co-pilot type features, I think are really valuable. And then more in the long term, just I think about like when it comes to like the mental health impact or, the way that it impacts people, seeing like the job landscape change rapidly, or seeing like the way that we kind of interact, which has already changed with being more online than ever, or more attached to social media apps than ever.
True.
It does present a moment where I think we as humans, ideally can spend some more time self-reflecting, more time connecting to others, make sure that the excitement around LLMs and the opportunity doesn't lead us to lose track of our ability to connect to other humans. And, certainly on the day-to-day at the job, like the way that we interact with people, I think is more than ever important. Like we can be technically apt, but the way that we can be extremely valuable alongside, say, the technical tools is by knowing the business really well, being really, empathetic and understanding and collaborative with the people we work with, things like that.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's powerful. Okay, JB, there's one particular topic that you've been invested in recently that I am intrigued to learn more about from you. It's the concept of Kimball modeling. So for the benefit of the audience, because obviously I know all about Kimball modeling, I've been studying it for 50 years, but what is Kimball modeling and what's the relevance to data professionals? Break that down for us.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, basically, Kimball or Ralph Kimball, he built a dimensional modeling approach, which is basically a way of designing a data warehouse to, structure the data, answer questions really efficiently, facilitate, all sorts of downstream reporting, BI, all the rest. And it's typically followed this like 4-step process where you select the business process you want to model. Yep. You identify the grain or the granularity of that data that you want to answer questions on. And then you identify the dimensions or the attributes related to that business case. And then finally, you identify the facts, which is like, what are the metrics, values, things that we care about, KPIs connected to that area of the business. Build kind of tables accordingly.
That's interesting. Okay, so Ralph Kimball, when he created this method of modeling, what problem was he solving? Like, what were people using prior to him inventing this new approach?
Honestly, all sorts of stuff. Yeah. It was early on. It was in the 90s when the dimensional modeling approach was coming together. So, prior to that, it was a little bit of the Wild West, and certainly, some analytics were just being done either by pulling data out, you think of like sheets or, manually printing it and way back.
Sounds fun.
Maybe answering questions directly in, databases like MySQL.
Yes.
There was certainly some data warehouse modeling that did exist, but, I think Kimball's goal was to formalize a way to build a data warehouse that could scale, that could answer questions effectively, and give people a blueprint to do that well.
I love that. I love that. How broadly is Kimball modeling being used, do you think?
I think it's being used a ton today. There are some other
Okay.
methods. There's like Inmun, there's Data Vault for those who are familiar with some of those. There's building kind of large denormalized tables too. And I think a lot of people, a
Okay.
lot of organizations, implementing Kimball style dimensional modeling in DBT, they use it, but they might use a kind of a modernized, a little bit tweak to it to say,
Mm.
this approach is awesome, but we maybe need to be a little bit practical or pragmatic on top of it. And maybe
Mm-hmm.
some things from the 90s, like, challenges with data storage costs are less of an issue today.
Well, that's true. That's fair. That's fair. So I understand the concept of Kimball modeling. Thanks for breaking it down. How does it apply to things like the semantic layer or even the agentic AI era that we're entering now?
Yeah. So kind of expanding on what I mentioned before, right? Like teams are trying to be a little bit pragmatic. They want to build,
Mhm.
they want to ideally go through this formal processes to build a good dimensional model in this Kimball style. But they are recognizing that, there are some trade-offs to that. It's sometimes harder to go through the formal process with how fast teams move today, with how fast businesses move and experiment today on their products and apps and services.
Yeah.
But also those downstream use cases are evolving. So when Kimball, dimensional modeling was first created, it was mostly reporting, mostly business intelligence BI that were the use
Okay.
cases, right? But now, data science, LLMs, semantic models, there are so many additional features, reverse ETL, custom applications reading that data that need to respond and have really high quality data, be very responsive and performant. And there's more pressure than ever on the dimensional model by a long shot.
Wow. Wow. This is interesting. And so, what work are you using Kimball modeling at BetterHelp currently?
Yes. Yeah, we do it today. We kind of are, kind of doing this pragmatic or somewhat evolved
Yeah.
approach. Yeah, the goal, I think, and something as you mentioned, I've been working on is trying to formalize and talk to other data professionals and experts. What does it look like to take and respect and recognize the value and the expertise and so much of the theoretical foundation that Kimball made, but evolve it very carefully, very aptly, but to meet these modern needs, to make sure that we can iterate quickly, that some of the things that were initially, ideated or initially kind of created that maybe don't apply as much now. What do we keep? What do we evolve? And how do we make
Yes.
sure it fits well, kind of modern, very rapid development and needs?
Right, right. I love that. One thing that I think could be helpful for us to flesh out actually, JB, the potential benefits of Kimball modeling sound fantastic. What could be the downside if we're thinking of like downstream applications, flexibility, maybe lack of flexibility, lack of scalability, lack of trustworthiness? Maybe paint that picture for us a little bit. What happens if organizations don't have Kimball modeling or some other modeling solution properly in place?
Yeah, yeah. There's a couple common pitfalls I think here. One of them is, the kind of the scrappy startup and they do kind of build everything just off of their source tables and they join them
Yeah,
together with a tool like Looker. They're like, we need to move quick. We don't have this.
yeah.
Let's go. Very common. That's kind of, the life cycle of early BetterHelp too. And I think
Okay.
one downfall of that is the minute the company gets bigger and people are relying on the fly joining 10, 20 tables together, you
Yeah.
can imagine how that goes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But another one I think, is, for folks that are maybe not embracing Kimball fully or, embracing it, but let's say embracing it in the true classical way, right?
Yes.
Might spend, a long dimensional modeling exercise, meeting with, business stakeholders, identifying the grain, planning things out fully, right? But, by that time, the business has released 10 more features and 2
Wow.
months trying to get the fact tables ready. But now what? Can we adapt them in? Hopefully, if you do a really good exercise, in theory, you can. But in
Yes.
practice, it is often pretty tough. I think a lot of teams struggle to keep their DBT models and their dimensional model up to date with the scale and speed the business is moving.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a pickle. I'll say the trustworthiness piece in particular, it feels like could be more and more of a concern Case in point, and this may not necessarily be a business case, but a lot of us are using ChatGPT or similar AI tools these days. And maybe unlike a search engine results page, often you're getting a single answer. Occasionally there will be reference links, but it's smaller fonts and most of us don't pay attention. We just take that single answer as fact. And as we start to rely more and more on these agentic tools, I'm wondering how we balance trustworthiness. How can we trust the data, considering many of us may not even be equipped to fact check the fact that this data is not totally accurate?
Right. No, 100%. It's a good comparison because I think as data folks, analytics engineers, and beyond, we have to kind of think about our users very carefully and what do they expect, right? And if we're competing with the user experience of something like ChatGPT with rapid answer with good detail, can we offer that in data? And I think the answer is, well, maybe and hopefully if we do it right, but with some caveats, right? And I think about tools like, DBT in combination with something like Snowflake's Cortex Analyst, which is the goal is to like hook up maybe to Slack and let people type questions of their data and get an answer. That capability requires a really strong semantic model, like so deep semantic layer, et cetera, can feed those responses, effectively. And 2, it requires really good understanding and definitions of metrics. And 3, it requires building your whole dimensional model, your data warehouse, with those downstream cases in mind. We can't skip the documentation, the semantic, the metadata. If those tools are to be relied on to that level, those things need to be built in, or at least foundationally considered in how you build your dimensional model and your table. So that's a portion of what that evolve looks like, is kind of considering that an essential part of the dimensional modeling exercise, given whether it is solutions like that or other LLM use cases that are becoming basically a requirement downstream for so many.
Man, I'll tell you what, it's actually kind of exciting. The elevated importance of data engineers and data architects, because a lot of the solutions, the technology that people are depending on more and more are sitting on top of the work that you guys are building. So that's pretty exciting. Thank you for breaking all this down for me. Sorry for all the questions, but I find this endlessly fascinating. Let's go into the structure of your data team at BetterHelp. So how is the data team currently set up today?
Yeah. So within my team, it's a combined team of data and analytics engineers. I have a love for both. There's also some data analysts too, but yeah, long story short, that the team kind of, thinks of data engineering and analytics engineering as people that, can and should collaborate very often. They're both in the data warehouse. They're both working on the sort of early layers, the dimensional model, more of a focus for data engineering. Analytics engineering teams focused on that semantic layer and our facts and dimensions, and do a lot of active collaboration.
Gotcha. That's pretty cool. And we like to ask this data disaster question because as well thought out as your team structure is and as wonderful as all the projects you've worked on are, I'm sure you've had some data disasters in your life. So maybe not necessarily a BetterHelp, but over the span of your career, have there been any data disasters you've run into that you could share with us today?
Yeah. Here's a fun example. For those out there who use Snowplow, so event tracking, streaming, event collection tool, and a lot of those events can stream into a data warehouse and then get transformed with DBT, right? Well, that event volume can get huge, terabytes, massive, right? And, we had a situation where in DBT, we were processing that data incrementally, but we didn't have any safeguards for if somebody, just hit full refresh, like DBT run full refresh on those models. And in the way that our pipeline was set up, there was an initial step that basically kind of replaced some of the old events if we did it that way. So long story short, one of the models in production got run with a DBT full refresh instead of incrementally. And now we take this terabytes of events and they're just gone. They're just not available for folks to work with, right? And that's not good. They're still available, I should say. They're gone from the analytics kind of ready environment, but now they need to be processed again, which could take days, based on the set of steps that need to happen. And you could imagine the business would not be stoked about that. So we did find a workaround. We were able to use some of the sort of time travel features in Snowflake in that case to kind of solve some of it. But wow,
Yeah.
it was a late night for those who've been involved with such things. Never too fun having those, but yeah.
I think most of us have been there. It's giving me PTSD vibes right now, actually, because I used to do a lot of database work back in the day as a computer scientist myself. Okay, happy thoughts. Happy thoughts, JB. Let's think about, could you share maybe a project that you're particularly proud of?
Yeah. One that comes to mind is, going back to the DBT Looker days, right? I've,
Yes.
worked with some folks that, use DBT and Looker together pretty often. And
Right.
one thing that I got to work with a team was setting up a mechanism to automatically persist DBT descriptions and metadata and all that into Looker. So you didn't have to update your description in Looker and have it in DBT, make sure they're aligned up, right?
Right.
Kind of had some automation to allow that to happen. By the way, there are some tools now, like for those who are familiar with Omni, the BI tool, they kind of hook up to DBT more directly too, which is
Yeah,
cool.
yeah.
But for those that are in the Looker to DBT space, and I think not on BigQuery, that can be a challenge. So it was kind of fun to get that set up and try to get the real connectivity there. It's a little in the weeds, but hey, I have a love for sometimes the little things in data can just
Of course. Of course. I love that. I love that story. That's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one. With that in mind, and considering, JB, that you've worked in a few different industries, you've worked at different types of organizations, some consulting, some not. How do you think about measuring the value of your work, the impact of your work on the business? Because a lot of data pros struggle with this.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. And for, myself, like it can impact, like, how do we hire, like, how do I make a case for that, and measurability can be tricky. I totally agree. And, some of the methods that I've seen work particularly well that I can mention, one, early business buy-in. I think if folks really understand the 2 steps to get to value that sometimes, is true for folks that work more on the back end of things in data.
Right.
The data scientist, maybe they can say my, forecasting model or my, outputs, I can attach a dollar amount, right? Or experimentation, they can do that. For us, we often have 2 leaps. Like, we helped this team get there, but we, us doing that quickly or helping those teams be data driven, it's a story, right? Sometimes that story needs to be told, and it needs to be told really well connected to the business. I would say, again, the mental health side, lead with empathy. Help the business understand recognize that you see their problems, talk about the high level patterns you do to help them move quickly and help the company be more of a data driven culture or adapt more quickly. I think a lot of people recognize that some of those things are very important, recognize it's hard to quantify. And if you can kind of tell that story about how you get there, you do a great job and can paint that output. I think the one other thing I'll say is, capture metadata too. So for internal reporting, how often is your data available and fresh and on time? Okay. Report those outputs too, to your data leaders. I think, when you're more within your team, they see how valuable that is and see how that really impacts things.
Right. That's cool. I hadn't necessarily thought of those before. I appreciate that perspective. I will say the earning early buy-in is hard work, JB. It's hard work. It involves humans and persuasion and, different opinions and perspectives. And us humans are a lot less logical than we like to pretend we are. You get 5 people in a room, you're going to have 7 different opinions about something. So I'm just curious as to maybe how you feel you honed your skills, your communication skills, your data storytelling skills, your persuasion skills. And goodness, we're talking to someone who's, into psychology and mental health. How can data professionals become more adept, more skilled at winning over the room?
Yeah, no, I like that for sure. I think a great question. One of my favorite things is to, again, like really lean into empathy and really lead with a listening ear. I think a lot of folks in business, in data and beyond, they want to make sure that data practitioners like understand them. Like, if they feel like you can hear their problems and maybe even echo them back and say, like, I see that you've had trouble getting this data on time and you don't know why things take a while. That totally makes sense. Like, I could understand you're a salesperson, you're trying to win deals. Let's talk about what are some of those specific things. Let's talk about how we could get there with those, right?
Wow.
just try to get to that level. Because I think if you skip that step, even if it maybe feels like it should be kind of obvious that you're trying to understand, saying it out loud helps people feel heard. And that step of feeling heard is so huge.
Man, we shouldn't skip past that right there, JB, because it really does feel almost overly simplistic. Let's be honest, but us humans are weird like that. Like just the fact of you restating my anxieties and my problems to me, even before you propose any sort of solution, I'm already going to feel like, man, that JB dude, he gets me. Like, I'm going to give him a little bit more rope, a little bit more grace in solving this problem.
Yeah. And leading with it with, I'd say like, what's the word I'm looking for? Being authentic. That's the word. I think people can sense if you're, maybe kind of trying to paint a certain picture to them, right? I think if you have, I know it may be not always easy. And as data folks, we love the technical side generally. Like we're ready to jump in. We want to talk about those problems and talk about how cool solution gets us there.
Yes, please.
If you can lead, yes. But if you can kind of have that authentic, you don't have to, kind of come across as a salesperson yourself to do that. I think, you can still have your identity. You can still talk with them as humans, but not skipping that step, I think is super powerful.
That's a big one, folks. That's a big one. Simple, but not easy. Okay. This is great, JB. I gotta let this guy get back to work really soon. This has been so illuminative for me. I've got a couple more questions for you before we let you go, JB. What does professional success look like to you in this field? And I think you are uniquely equipped to answer this question because you've pursued success at the highest level academically, athletically, and you've almost had a couple of different chapters professionally. So at this point, what does professional success look like to you?
To me, at this point, it's different to everybody, but the big step, I think the most important thing you can do is look at it 10,000 feet. Think about what you want in life. Like, do you want is kind of just making, a lot of money your goal, or is being part of something mission driven that you are connect with your goal? Connect to your goal. Don't connect to someone else's. I'd done that before. I'd kind of accidentally connected to a family member's goal for me. And, that can lead to, things that weren't great. So figure out what your definition of professional success is, anchor to that, and maybe try to avoid, if you can, letting others tell you what that is, which isn't always easy, but it can lead to more happiness, which I think is so important.
Ooh, I tell you what, we could unpack that alone into the second hour of the show. Dang. Yo, like not letting other people's definitions of success, that's super layered, because a lot of times these individuals mean well. They mean us well, but by us subscribing to their vision of success, we could end up investing years of our lives into something that ultimately doesn't serve us.
Yeah.
That was good. I want to sidebar real quick. Before we started recording, at the time of this recording, it's a couple of days before Mother's Day. JB and I were talking about Mother's Day, and I was like, JB, you got any cool plans? JB, tell him what you're doing for Mom on Mother's Day. Tell him.
Yeah. We're heading to Japan, just my mom and I. Yeah, it's we've been planning it for a little bit. I was telling Bolaji, my mom's a huge Disney mom. She goes to Disneyland as much as possible, and we're going to try to go to Tokyo Disney. And neither of us have ever done a trip like that. Definitely haven't really left North America too much. So we're very excited.
I can't stop smiling at that. I mean, it's beautiful. That is a beautiful thing. As a parent right now, and as a parent of scholar athletes, I'm seeing how much the parents pour into these kids, right? Because they still need your help driving you around. I feel like an Uber driver many a day. For you to be able to do this for your mom, man, this is like life goals type level stuff. So well done. And I just want to point out, we're talking about professional success, but to me, this story came to mind when we started talking about this topic. Being able to have the means to do this, some people want to buy a fancy car, and that's cool. Some people want to buy, a house on the hill, or that's great as well. This is something JB decided to invest in that to him is, I think, a measure of his professional success. So well done.
Oh, thank you so much for saying. Yeah, and I agree. I try to anchors to what I want to value, where ideally where, that I guess where the money goes. And super appreciative of the means to do that. Thank you for sharing that.
That's incredible. That's incredible. JB, have you had any key mentors or influences along your career that you'd like to shout out?
Oh, yeah. No, thanks for the ask. I think, so many, amazing folks that have kind of shaped, my time over the years. I think maybe I feel like I could leave some folks out, but since it's kind of connected to what we talked about today, I'll just shout out my father-in-law. His name is Barry, but kind of that last part of the discussion, we were talking about trying to really connect to your career to what you really want, not letting that be elsewhere. I almost can't get an opinion on what I should do with my career out of him because he doesn't want to influence me. He just wants it to be about, what I care about. And he really emphasizes that human aspect. So I think he's helped shape my view of things in a lot of ways.
Wow, man. What a testament, man. Shout out to Pops Barry. We appreciate you, man. You've done a great job helping to raise this young man in his adult years. So thank you for that. That was a great share. We got to end with some hopium here. Let's give some data professionals some hope as we're closing out. You've had a career with peaks and with valleys, but you're still standing and you're doing very exciting work. You're obviously on the frontier of the next generation, the next chapter for our industry. For data professionals who are coming up, they're going through their own trials and tribulations in their career. Give us some encouragement. What are some things that they could latch on to? What are some things they could maybe invest in that will help them get to the next level?
Totally. I'll give 3 real quick. First one, don't be scared by the AI LLM space. A lot of the work that we're doing, in data and analytics engineering, it is foundational to that future state. Working with those tools being downstream. It's a huge part of the pipeline, and maybe it's not going anywhere. I think it's a huge part of what we do, and we're a big part of it. So don't be spooked off by that. There's a ton of opportunity. 2, since we're here, DBT is used everywhere. DBT is still massively needed, and it's foundational to so many organizations, core and cloud. So I do believe investing deeply here. DBT is my favorite tool, I'll just admit, in the data space. And then lastly, I would say in investing in when you do get that opportunity, whatever it might be, when you first get to an organization, dive in deep on the business. Really try to understand it. Really try to understand your stakeholders too. Because if you showcase that and understand metrics or understand business cases end to end, it just makes you so valuable at that organization. I would say that's one of the most important things we can do as data folks.
Wow. Phenomenal. Folks, we've been talking to JB, former semi-pro baseball player, self-professed, still reality TV nerd, and armchair psychologist for us data professionals who might need, some encouragement, but really, really just a stand-up guy, doing a lot of stuff with Kimball dimensional modeling as well. JB, are we going to get to hear any bit more about what you're doing with Kimball dimensioning in the coming months?
Yeah. Certainly it's an active kind of research area for me. For those in the DBT community, I'm hoping to kind of share it out, kind of a qualitative, quantitative review of some of these topics that might end up being a white paper. And, we'll see. I mean, this is in the works, but possibly in an upcoming coalesce, kind of talk about these outputs and really speak to the findings there.
I like it. Little teaser right there. Okay, well, hopefully we get to see JB and his research on Kimball modeling on a coalesce stage. I have no input on the matter, but I'm rooting for you. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. JB. Thank you, JB, for being here. We appreciate you.
Bolaji, thank you so much. It's been an honor, man. You've been amazing. Thank you again.
And thank you, folks, for hanging out with us. We'll see you on the next one. Bye for now. This show is brought to you by DBT. DBT is the industry standard for data transformation. It allows your team to prepare data for analysis in a way that's centralized, modular, and entirely open, all inside your cloud data platform. The outcome? Consistently dependable analytics for your organization. Now, the DBT community was built for and by data pros. Come hang out and transform with 70,000 of the brightest analytics engineers, data analysts, and data scientists in the world. With DBT, you transform your data. With the DBT community, you transform your data career.